This is a story about one of the most famous and popular heroes in English folklore. Nobody knows exactly when he lived. Indeed, no one can be absolutely sure that he ever lived at all. What is certain is that sometime before the end of the 14th century, 600 years ago, stories were being told and songs were being sung about a brave outlaw somewhere in central England who gathered around him a band of loyal followers. He was an incomparable archer. His great enemy was the Sheriff of Nottingham. He lived by hunting in the forest and robbing rich travellers. He was always kind and courteous to the poor and to women. And his name was Robin Hood.
It was a spring morning in the forest. The air was soft and cool and still. Here and there, glancing blades of sunlight cut through the spreading branches above to splash pools of brightness onto the forest floor among the darker greens. All was quiet. It seemed almost as if the whole of nature was holding its breath. But if you looked very closely, you might just make out the figure of a man moving through the glades and thickets. He was moving carefully, making no sound, and pausing often to search the area around him with his eyes. He was difficult to see because he was dressed completely in green, Lincoln green. His stockings of a light shade, his tunic darker, his cap darker still, with a long bird's feather stuck in it at a jaunty angle. His face and hands were brown and weathered. When he stopped and looked and listened, absolutely still, he merged so naturally into the background that he became virtually invisible. He was a young man of medium height, sturdily built and well-proportioned. At his back hung a long bow and a quiver of arrows. His step was light and easy. He was alone. He was, of course, Robin Hood. He progressed in this way for a long time, noticing everything, disturbing nothing, until the forest thinned out and he emerged on the bank of a fast-flowing river. There was full sunlight here and a broad path, and 100 yards downstream the river was spanned by a tree trunk roughly flattened on the top. Robin paused a moment, blinking a little in the brightness, and then he saw the figure of a man approaching the bridge from the other side of the river. He stepped out briskly then, only to notice that the other man had quickened his pace. So he went faster, almost running, and the other man did the same, with the result that they reached the opposite ends of the bridge at exactly the same moment, and it was only wide enough for one of them to cross at a time. "Wait there, young man," the stranger called. "I shall cross first." "Why should you have the precedence?" asked Robin. "Because I am older than you. Have you not been taught to defer to your elders?" "Yes, I have," called Robin, "and I would have given you the precedence gladly if you'd not demanded it so rudely. But since you were unmannerly, I shall demand in my turn." And so saying, he clipped an arrow into his bow and levelled it. "You behave like a coward," the stranger taunted. "You can see I have nothing but my quarterstaff. If you wish me to respect you as a man, then cut yourself a staff, and we will fight the matter out fairly." Robin agreed, and went to the forest edge to cut himself a stout oak staff about 4 feet long. As he returned, he looked closely at his adversary and began to wonder if he would not have been wiser to give way, for he was a massive man, nearly 7 feet tall, and everywhere in proportion, broad and solid and strong. "Are you ready yet?" came the call. "Aye, and more than ready for you, old fellow," replied Robin. "You will shortly regret that you called me a coward. Let us fight in the middle of the bridge, so that I may have the pleasure of knocking you into the river and washing away your manifold sins." They advanced towards each other until they stood a yard apart and right above the deep water. "Now we shall determine the right of way hereabouts." And with that the stranger swung his quarterstaff in a swift and vicious arc. It would have cracked Robin's skull if he'd not seen it just in time and ducked under the whistling wood, then lunged forward with his own staff to catch the stranger a sharp blow in the ribs. The stranger gasped and stepped back a pace. Then he roared with anger and came forward with a flying volley of blows. Robin held his staff in both hands to use it as a shield, blocking and parrying, ducking and leaning back, praying that the stranger would swing so hard he might propel himself clean off the bridge. But the stranger knew what he was about. He not only managed to keep his balance, but time and again his staff rapped Robin's knuckles painfully, and occasionally he got through to catch Robin a stinging blow on the side of the head, to set his ears ringing and his senses reeling. It was hard work, like trying to ride a whirlwind, Robin thought. And he was just wondering whether the giant stranger would ever tire, when the quarterstaff swished even faster than before and caught Robin such a mighty buffet on the side of the head that he toppled from the bridge and plunged into the river. Robin was so hot and battered from the fight that the cold, fresh water had a soothing and reviving effect. When he bobbed to the surface a few yards downstream, he saw his victor kneeling on the bridge and peering anxiously down. "Here I am," called Robin. "The right-of-way is yours. If you would be so kind as to proceed across the bridge, we will rest a while together." "With the greatest of pleasure," the stranger replied. Robin clambered onto the riverbank to find the massive frame of the stranger stretched out comfortably in the sun, and a broad smile on his face. "Oh, you are the most ferocious wielder of the quarterstaff I ever came across," said Robin. "Tell me, what is your name?" "John Little." "It belies your stature, my friend. And what brings you to Sherwood Forest?" "I have been told the outlaw Robin Hood lives here, and I hope to meet him and perhaps join his company." "Why do you want to do that?" "Well, I have recently run into trouble with the authorities myself, and I believe this Robin Hood has gathered about him a band of men who have all run foul of the law in one way or another. And a foul law it is that turns such harmless souls as me into an outlaw. And I hear they lead a free life in the great forest, so I thought I would seek 'em out and offer my services." "Well, if you are as dangerous with the broadsword and the longbow as you are with the quarterstaff, then I believe he would welcome your services most heartily," said Robin. "Do you know the man, then?" "More than that. I am the man." "You? Robin? You are Robin Hood?" "None other." "Oh, then I'd best travel on. I cannot hope to take service with a man I've knocked into the river before I even introduce myself." "Yes, you can," said Robin, "and right welcome you are. We need such men as you in our company, and I have no doubt that your victory on the bridge there was the merest matter of luck." "Luck?" cried John Little. Then he caught Robin's twinkling eye and burst into a great roar of laughter, and when that had subsided, he took Robin's hand, still sore and raw from the flailing quarterstaff, in his great grasp and shook it long and painfully. As they walked along the forest tracks, Robin told his new companion about life under the greenwood tree, about his band of 40 outlaws, men like Will Scarlet and Much the miller's son, how they supported themselves by taking money from rich travellers, though they gave most of it away again to the poor peasants of the region, how they lived by hunting the game of the forest, the deer and partridges and rabbits. In those days, much of England was covered with great forests of oak and ash and beech, and most of the forests belonged by law to the king or the great nobleman. It was strictly forbidden for ordinary men to hunt the animals in these woods, and the penalty was death by hanging. "But what can a man do?" asked Robin. "They put us outside the protection of the law, so they give us no alternative but to live as best we can by our skill as hunters, and survive as best we can by avoiding the authorities. Here in Sherwood, our great enemy is the Sheriff of Nottingham. He has sworn to have my life, and more than once he's tried to capture me. So far, God be thanked, he's failed. But even so, I must be on my guard at all times, and I have to rely on the complete loyalty of my men." "You may trust me," said John Little. "Indeed, this path is so twisting and hidden, I do not think I could lead your enemies to your lair, even if I had a mind to betray you." "You will find your way about soon enough," Robin replied. "I chose this place because it is so remote and secret. The sheriff's men are not likely to stumble across it by accident, and it would take them months of searching, years even, to find it. But do you smell roasting venison? We're nearly there. And a moment later, they emerged suddenly into a wide clearing, completely surrounded by dense undergrowth. When Robin introduced John Little to his men and told the story of their meeting, some of them, Will Scarlet especially, were all for throwing him into the nearby stream. But Robin would not allow that. It had been a fair fight, he said, and a just victory. "Then I have another idea," said Will Scarlet. "Tonight we will turn our dinner into a christening party. We'll drink some of that fine red wine we were fortunate enough to find in the bishop's baggage train the other day, and give this new recruit a new name. He came to us as John Little. Now his life is changed. Let his new name, his Greenwood name, be Little John." There was a roar of approval. And though he stayed with Robin for many long years, and in time came to be his second-in-command and most trusted lieutenant, and though he never grew any smaller or slimmer, he was always known from that time on as Little John. A few days after Little John joined the band of outlaws, Robin took him, with Will Scarlet and a dozen others, on a journey northwards. He was looking for a second hidden home in the great forest of Barnesdale in South Yorkshire, some refuge they could escape to if the Sheriff of Nottingham ever made life too dangerous for them in Sherwood. It was late afternoon when they found a suitable place and decided to camp there. Robin set his men to clearing the ground and making it as spacious and comfortable as possible. Then he took 3 of them, Little John, Will Scarlet, and Much the miller's son, to one side. "I will go and find a fat deer for our supper, but I should like to see some guest at our table tonight, someone to share our meat and perhaps give us generous payment for it. So you 3 make your way to the Great North Road. It's only a mile to the east of here, and persuade some traveller, some rich traveller, to join us at supper." Little John had not been with them long enough to know all Robin's ways, and he did not understand that what Robin called an invitation to supper was what others, especially his guests, were more likely to call highway robbery. For he gave them no chance to refuse his invitation and made sure they paid as handsomely as they could afford. "What sort of guest do you want?" asked Little John. "Why, anyone you find passing along the road who looks as if he'd be able to pay well for his meal. Some prior or fat abbot, or a bishop or a baron or a knight. I like grand company when I dine, but if you see any women or men of humbler rank, peasants or small farmers, let them pass on their way." "Come on," said Will Scarlet. "I have been with Robin long enough to know his wishes. Be advised by me, and all will be well." The lengthening evening shadows of the great trees pointed the way for them, and they soon came to a wide stony track, Watling Street, the main road up the centre of England from north to south. They crouched in a low ditch at the roadside, their suits of Lincoln green blending into the grasses and ferns behind them. And they waited. It was a long time before anyone came. Little John, who was growing very hungry, was stirring impatiently, when Will Scarlet hissed, "Quiet! There's someone now coming from the north. A man on a horse, alone." The figure approached them slowly. "He's a knight, to judge from his appearance," whispered Much the miller's son. "And a right miserable one, too," said Little John. "But I never saw a more dejected-looking fellow. I don't think he'll be very cheerful company for us at table." "Or able to pay much." "But he's our man all the same. There are too few travellers on this road, and my hunger is growing by the second." With that he jumped from the ditch, dropped to one knee before the knight, and said, "My master bids you welcome, gentle knight, and invites your company at his table." "Who is your master?" asked the knight. "Robin Hood." "Why, then I will go with you gladly, for I have heard many tales of his kindness to the poor and needy, and have long wished to meet him." They dined well that evening, and when he'd finished, the knight thanked Robin graciously. "I thank you for your thanks," said Robin, "and for your company, but you must pay what you can for the meal. It would not be right for a knight such as you to let a poor yeoman like me provide his food." "I agree," the knight said, "but alas, I have little money." "How much precisely?" "No more than 10 shillings. Robin told Little John to search the knight's saddlebags. Then, turning again to the knight, he said, "If you're telling the truth, I shall not touch your money. And if you have need of more money, why then I shall lend it to you." "He told the truth," Little John called. "There is scarcely 10 shillings here." "Then, my true and honest knight," said Robin, "you have dined tonight for nothing, except that I should dearly like to know how it comes about that a noble knight should be travelling the road without a servant or attendant, so poorly dressed, and with so little money." So the knight told them his story. His name was Sir Richard of Lee. He sprang from an ancient family with big estates in Cheshire and Lancashire. "I have a son," he said, "a strong young man and a fine horseman. He was the champion of the whole region at jousting. Then, just a year ago, a knight came down from Lancaster and challenged my son in the tournament. Alas, the second time they charged, my son's lance struck home all too truly and killed him. It was an accident, but my boy was condemned to hang for it. To buy his pardon, I raised all the money I could, but it was not enough for the flint-hearted sheriff. So I had to borrow £400 from the Abbot of St. Mary's in York. I promised that I would repay the money in a year's time, or surrender all my lands and property to the abbey. Now the time of reckoning has come. Tomorrow is the day. I must present myself at the abbey and tell the abbot to take my land, as I cannot pay the money. You know how much money I have." They were silent for a while. "I have heard of the Abbot of St. Mary's," Robin said. "A great fat man, I'm told, and a great acquirer of land and wealth, more concerned with the riches of this world than the true work of God. Nothing will delight him more than to hear that you cannot repay the loan." "That is true," said the knight. "He is such a man. I will not be the first to lose all my possessions in order to enrich the abbey." "What will you do when your lands are all gone?" asked Robin. "I will go to the Holy Land, to see the places where Christ our Lord lived and died, and join the Crusaders in their fight to drive the Saracens out of Palestine." Robin thought for a moment. "If I could find someone who would be prepared to lend you £400, what security would you offer him that the money would be repaid in a year's time?" "I can offer none," the knight replied, "except my word of honour as a knight of England, and my faith in Our Lady, the Mother of Christ, that she would help me to find a way out of my difficulties." "By the worthy God," cried Robin, "you could have offered no better security than that, for I honour the name of Our Lady above all others. Go to our treasury box, Little John, and bring £400 for our friend." The knight was overwhelmed. "When shall I return the money to you?" he asked. "This day 12-month," Robin replied, "under this greenwood tree." "But what of his clothes?" roared Little John. "He cannot go before the abbot in this bedraggled condition. Look at his boots." So they found a fine new outfit for the knight. "You will need a squire too," said Robin, "to stand by you in case of need. I will lend you Little John as your attendant on the journey. Let us sleep now, for tomorrow you two must rise early and be on your way to York." The Abbot of St. Mary's in York was in his most expansive mood the next morning, as the clock moved towards noon, and there was no sign of Sir Richard of Lee. Noon was the appointed time for the repayment.
"He will not come. I'm sure he will not come," chuckled the abbot. "Oh, poor fellow, he cannot possibly have raised the money. It's marvellous how a man's friends fall away from him when his fortunes turn against him. My spies tell me the good knight is as poor as he was a year ago." Just think of it, my friends, he cried, turning to the prior and the chief cellarer. In half an hour's time, all those broad, rich acres of land, and all the cattle and sheep and the wild game of his forests and the farms and 2 fine manor houses, all that will fall to the possession of the abbey. It is the bounty of God. We Christians may not be allowed to lend money at rates of interest, but we are sometimes rewarded for our generosity at a better rate than that. For who can measure a paltry £400 against such an acquisition? Come, my friends, it is good cause for celebration.
There is still time, said the prior.
Oh, have no fear. He will not come, laughed the abbot. But a few minutes later, just as he was raising his second glass of wine to his lips, the door was flung open, and Sir Richard entered, attended by Little John. Sir Richard wore his old tattered cloak over his new clothes. He advanced slowly and knelt before the abbot.
I am here, my Lord Abbot, as I promised.
Have you brought the money, as you promised?
No, my lord.
Oh, then you're an accursed debtor, cried the abbot, much relieved at the news. But if you cannot repay the debt, why did you come here?
To ask for more time in which to raise the money, my lord.
More time? More time? You've had 12 whole months already. How much more time do you want? No, this is the time, the appointed time.
Sir Richard asked the prior and the chief cellarer to plead his cause for him, but both refused.
Perhaps, my Lord Abbot, said Sir Richard, still on his knees, perhaps you will hold my lands in trust for me until such time as I can repay the money.
Indeed I will not. If you cannot pay now, then you know the consequences. Your lands are forfeit to the abbey forever.
Seeing that there was no charity in this man of God, and that the hour of noon was only 1 minute away, Sir Richard rose quietly to his feet.
It was not courteous of you, he said, to let me kneel before you so long and plead my case so piteously. Had you shown me any grace, I would have rewarded your abbey with some gift. Since you showed none, I will give you the money I owe, and not 1 penny more. He flung off his old cloak and threw 2 leather bags of coins onto the table. The abbot had turned pale.
Count the money, he said.
The prior did so.
It is there, my lord, £400.
And at that moment, the clock began to strike 12. Sir Richard turned on his heels without another word, and with Little John at his side, strode from the abbey. That evening they told the story to Robin and his men. The next morning, after repeating his promise to return with the money in 1 year's time, with many expressions of gratitude, Sir Richard of Lee rode northwards to the lands that were his. The spring days lengthened into summer, and new life burgeoned in the forest. But outside, the cold hand of tyranny and oppression lay upon the land. No sheriff in all England was more cruel and more rigorous than the Sheriff of Nottingham. More and more honest yeomen were hounded from their homes and joined the outlaw band. They were young men, for the most part, and strong and vigorous. They thrived on the free life of the open air. They hunted deer and took money sometimes from wealthy travellers and made sure none of the poor folk of the region went without food or shelter. They amused themselves with contests of speed and strength and skill. Who could run the fastest or climb the highest trees? Which of them was the strongest and which had the greatest stamina? Who was most formidable with sword or quarterstaff or longbow? About the longbow there was never any question, for though there were many fine archers among them, none was so sure and accurate as Robin himself. One day in midsummer, when they were resting from practice with the quarterstaff, Will Scarlet said, "Little John may still be the master among us, but I know of one who would batter his head to a pudding with no difficulty if he were here."
Who is that marvel?
asked Little John.
Why, a monstrous fat friar who lives the life of a hermit by the river 12 miles or so from here.
Is he the friar who was cast out of Fountain's Abbey by the pompous abbot? Asked Robin.
The same. He keeps himself now, I'm told, by carrying travellers across the river to save their legs from a wetting.
The man they call Friar Tuck, said Little John.
Aye, they gave him that name because he always wears the long habit of the friar and he tucks it up above his knees when he's fighting or when he ferries his clients through the river.
I think I would like to meet this curious cleric and find out if he is so fearsome as they say. Let me go tomorrow, Robin, and seek him out. No, said Robin. If he is so mighty, he will surely rattle your brains about your head, and you already have few enough to spare. I will go myself, and see if cunning might triumph, where force would certainly fail. Robin was up and away before first light next morning. He dressed in the costume of a wandering minstrel, though he was careful to buckle on his sword as well, and to carry a stout quarterstaff. He moved so swiftly that it was still only 9 o'clock when he reached the river and saw the friar's hut on the further side. There was no sign of life, so he called out, "Good morning, good friar. Are you still sleeping on this fine morning?"
Who is that calls so early?
The deep grumble came from inside the hut, and a minute or so later, the wide figure of the friar filled the doorway. "I'm a wandering minstrel," Robin said. "I wish to cross the river, and I hear that you act in the office of a ferry boat."
"I'll be with you shortly,"
the friar said, disappearing into the hut. When he came out, Robin noticed that he'd tucked his habit into his belt, and now wore a sword and a helmet. The friar waded across, the water was nowhere more than 2 feet deep, caught Robin up onto his back, and carried him over as if he weighed no more than a sparrow. But when he gained the shore, he suddenly threw Robin to the ground and stood massively over him, 1 foot on Robin's sword.
"Now you are across the river, and as dry as you were before, it is customary at this point for the traveller to express his gratitude."
"Then I thank you," said Robin, "with all my heart."
"And with some of your money, too."
"Oh, surely you would not wish to rob a poor minstrel?"
"Rob? Who spoke of robbery? I merely beg for alms for Mother Church and her poor servant."
"No man should be forced to give alms."
"That is so," said the friar, "and yet it is my duty as a priest to awaken your conscience. You have accepted my service. Your conscience should tell you that it is only just that you should offer me some payment."
"But I have no money," said Robin. And it was true. He'd been careful to put no coins in his purse that morning.
"Then you must return whence you came, and get your legs wet, you miserable minstrel,"
roared the friar, and he drew his sword and held it at Robin's throat, and forced him to take his great weight on his back, 20 stones at the least, and carry him back across the river. And all the way across he laughed and poured abuse on Robin, and beat him about the behind with the flat of his sword. Robin staggered through the water, suffering all and saying nothing, and considering his next move. And just as they reached the bank, he leant suddenly forward and toppled the friar over his head and leapt onto him, pinning him down in his turn. "Now, you monstrous man of God," he laughed, "we will make the journey again, and this time you shall be the beast of burden once more." He forced the friar to sheathe his sword, then jumped on his back and urged him into the water. Now it was Robin's turn to use the flat of his sword on the broad bottom of the friar, and he made the most of it. "Come on, old horse," he cried. "Come on, my gigantic donkey, most monstrous ass." He was enjoying himself so heartily that for a moment he didn't realize what was happening, when right in the middle of the river, the friar suddenly lurched sideways and plunged them both into a deep pool. Robin was the first ashore. He shook the water from himself and found his quarterstaff, and was waiting, poised and smiling, as the friar floundered onto dry land, blowing out water like a whale and snorting like a grampus. "If you still want payment," Robin said,
You must take it from my quarterstaff, for you'll get no other kind from me.
Give me a minute or two to catch my breath and get my staff, you saucy minstrel, and I will make you wish you'd paid me honestly in the first place and gone on your way with a whole head.
The friar shook himself like a great hound. Then he seized his staff and rushed at Robin like a whirlwind. He was very strong and astonishingly quick for one of his size, and in the first onslaught he got through Robin's defence with several cracking blows. But Robin soon saw the trick of it. He could not hope to match the friar for strength, but he was more than his match in speed and agility. He felt sure that as long as he could avoid any really punishing blow, he would wear his opponent out in time. It took a very long time, and in the end the fight petered out without a conclusion, for they were both too weary to continue.
"Oh, by heaven," gasped the friar, leaning on his staff. "You're a fine fighter for a minstrel. What is your name?"
Well, I am better known, perhaps, as an outlaw than as a singer of ballads. My name is Robin Hood.
Robin Hood? Oh, I should have known you were no ordinary man. I like what I hear of you. Indeed, I have sometimes wondered whether I should forsake the solitary life, for loneliness and frugal living do not agree with my nature, and seek a place in your company.
Well, there's always a place for such a stout fellow as you, said Robin, so long as you remember who is the leader in Sherwood.
Then I shall join you today, said the friar, and I shall try to remember my place, and refrain from giving you a ducking more often than is truly necessary, so long as you always remember the respect due to me as a man of God, eh?
The wheel of the seasons turned. High summer merged into golden autumn, and the forest tracks lay deep in crackling leaves. Then came the storms of winter and the long nights of cold, and all life in the forest, including the outlaws, lay low and endured. Finally came the first tiny signs of returning spring, and Robin remembered it would soon be time for Sir Richard of Lee to come and pay his debt of £400. So, with a small group of his men, he returned to Barnesdale to wait for the night.
Oh, have no fear of him, said Little John. He was an honest man, and he will surely come. Did he not swear by Our Lady that he would? He did, Robin replied, and I do not doubt that he will be here on the day. Meanwhile, let us liven ourselves with some fresh company. Take 2 men to the road, and see if you can find me a dinner guest for tonight. No sooner had Little John and his 2 companions settled themselves in the ditch by the road than they saw a string of pack horses approaching from the north, with a dozen or so men driving them along, and leading the way, a monk in a long black habit riding a palfrey.
Here's fit company for our leader, whispered Little John, and rich enough, I think, to pay well for their dinners. Stand close by me, and have your arrows ready.
And with that he sprang from the ditch and called, Halt there, worthy monk, or this arrow of mine will halt you forever. Do you not know that you've made my master angry? He's waiting for your company at dinner, and he's grown very hungry indeed. I had no invitation, fellow, said the monk, and I do not know your master. Stand aside and let me pass. You would know my master's name, I think. What is it? Robin Hood. Robin Hood? The notorious outlaw? The thief and vagabond? Aye, and your host at dinner tonight. I want no dinner from him, you rogue. Now out of my way. I have important business. But the monk had no choice. His men had disappeared at the mention of Robin's name. Little John took his reins and led the horse into the forest, while the others drove the rest of the pack animals behind. Little John had a strange feeling that he'd seen this monk before, but he couldn't think where until Robin started to question their guest at dinner. Whither were you travelling, good monk? To London. On business? On the business of my abbot. Well, who's he? The Lord of the Abbey of St. Mary's in the city of York. Indeed, said Robin with a quick glance at Little John. I've heard of your master. An able businessman, I'm told. A man of great property and wealth.
Aye, and girth, said Little John.
What is your office, good monk? Asked Robin. I am the High Cellarer. A splendid office, said Robin. You are triply welcome here, for your own sake, and for that of your noble calling, and for that of St. Mary, our Lady. I begin to wonder if you may not be her messenger to me. You come from her abbey, to be sure, and this is the time for the repayment of a debt to me, for which our Lady was the security. I know of no such debt. I have no message for you. How much money have you got, good cellarer? Very little. Some 20 marks, no more. No more than 20 marks for a business journey to London? I swear by Our Lady, no more than that. If you speak the truth, good cellarer, I will not take 1 penny. Indeed, if you have need of money, I will gladly give it to you. But if you are lying, and on the sacred oath of Our Lady's name, then you will forfeit the whole amount. When the packs were searched, they were found to contain more than £800 in gold and silver coins. Our Lady has been generous indeed, cried Robin, for she's more than doubled the money owing to us. Now take that lying cellarer back to the road with his horses, and let him find his way back to York. And tell your abbot, he called as the monk rode away, that he must send me another such messenger to dine with me. The very next day, Sir Richard of Lee arrived with the £400 he owed, and a gift of fine new longbows and arrows. But your debt has been paid already, said Robin, and he told him the story. Sir Richard still pressed Robin to accept the money, but he would not. Go back to your home, he said, and look after your land and your stock and your good neighbours. And if ever you need more money, come and ask me for it. For I do not doubt that Our Lady will look after her loyal servant in the future, as she always has in the past. Robin Hood's greatest enemy was the Sheriff of Nottingham, a tall, black-bearded man who never went anywhere without a bodyguard of 4 heavily armed attendants. With his friend, Guy of Gisborne, the sheriff made many attempts to capture Robin and break up the band of outlaws. But his soldiers could never even find them. It was uncanny how they could melt away in the forest, just when the sheriff thought they were trapped at last. It was distressing how many of their arrows found their mark, and it was infuriating how often the money he sent to London, taxes he'd raised in the area, was intercepted by the men in Lincoln Green and given back to the people. The king was furious when the money from Nottingham repeatedly failed to reach him and demanded to know why the sheriff could not keep order in his own region. The sheriff's rule became more and more brutal. Men's hands were chopped off for minor offences. Public brandings and hangings became a common sight. The oppression drove many young men to the forest to join the outlaw band, which quickly grew into a private army of nearly 150 men. The sheriff could not tolerate this. He swore that he would capture Robin Hood and have him hanged. And Robin knew, as well as the sheriff, that the day could not be far off when the matter between them would have to be settled once and for all. Little John, who was now Robin's most trusted companion, thought it would be wise to try to find out as much as possible about the sheriff's plans. One fine summer morning he was awake before dawn, turning the problem over in his mind. Now the sheriff, he thought, may have heard of me, but neither he nor any of his men have ever seen me. There'd be no danger of being recognized, so the thing to do is to work my way, if I can, into his company. And the chance for that is today, for this is the day of the archery contest in the city,
He got up quietly, put on a costume of russet and brown, took his bow and quiver of arrows, and crept out of the camp before anyone else was stirring. It was a long walk to Nottingham, but the air was fresh and calm and gave promise of a fine day, and when he reached the wide common in the heart of the city, he found it already bustling with folk. This was the great holiday of the month, when people from miles around would take a day from work to visit the market and watch the wandering players and listen to the ballads of the minstrels, to have their pockets picked, perhaps, but above all, to watch the contest of the archers. Little John wandered along, taking everything in. He went to look at the targets already set up, and the enclosure nearby, where the sheriff and his entourage would sit. Then he walked to the place near where the archers stood, more than 350 yards away.
"What do I do to enter this contest?" he asked.
"What's your name?" said the official.
"Ronald Greenleaf," answered Little John.
"Where are you from?"
"Yorkshire."
"Have you shot here before?"
"Never."
His massive size and obvious strength, together with his weathered features and the fact that he was a stranger, attracted a great deal of attention, and some of the local experts with the longbow wondered how good he was. They soon found out. Little John was on his best form that day. Months of hard practice in the greenwood had made him a fine archer. There was no wind to disturb the aim, and in the distance he could see the enclosure alongside the targets and the people gathering. Somewhere among them, he thought, is the Sheriff of Nottingham. This is my chance to catch his attention. He felt full of confidence. There were 50 competitors, but more than half of them were eliminated in the first round. Little John's arrow had found the gold, the small circle in the centre of the target. He found the gold again the next time, and the contestants were reduced to 3. A hush fell over the excited crowd as the finalists walked out for the climax of the contest. In the distance they saw the sheriff go up to the target and set against it a slender wand of willow, vertical, and right through the centre. The first finalist stepped forward, paused, then tensed himself and loosed his arrow. Every eye followed it as it soared high, catching the sunlight in a bright gleam, then plunged fiercely home into the target, just outside the gold, to the right of the willow wand. The second man walked to the line, drew his bowstring back with a strong, even pull, steadied himself for a long moment, then let the arrow fly. It thudded home, clipping the edge of the gold circle on the left of the wand. The cheers of the crowd died down as Little John advanced to the mark. He chose his arrow carefully, looked at the target, then in a single smooth and rapid movement he fitted the arrow, raised his bow, drew it to its full extent, sighted, and shot. The whole crowd held its breath as the arrow soared and glinted, seemed to hover for a split second, then plunged. There was a gasp, then a roar of cheering. Little John's arrow had struck the centre of the gold and split the willow wand. "By the living God, I never saw such marksmanship," cried the Sheriff of Nottingham, turning to Guy of Gisborne. "Who is this man?" "I have never seen him in my life before, but he's a fearsome size," Guy replied, as Little John approached the enclosure. "Yes, a giant. A useful man to have on one's side in a fight. Hey, you," the sheriff said to one of his attendants. "Fetch that champion archer here. I would speak with him." So Little John was brought before the sheriff. "I watched your shooting, my man, and found it most impressive. You must be a stranger in these parts, or else I would surely have heard of your skill with the longbow."
"Oh, yes, I am a stranger, sir," said Little John.
"Where is your home?"
"At Holderness in Yorkshire, sir."
"And what is your name?"
"Ronald Greenleaf."
"How would you like to stay here in Nottingham and live in my castle and be one of my men?"
"I should like it well enough, sir. but I owe my loyalty to my own master. I must return to his service."
"Is he a sheriff?"
"Oh, no, sir. Only a knight with a small body of attendants."
"And what does he pay you, Greenleaf?"
20 marks a year, sir."
The sheriff turned to Guy of Gisborne, and they whispered together briefly.
"I will pay you 30 marks a year if you join my service today."
"Today, sir? But I should in all conscience return to my master and tell him what I am doing."
"Oh, to hell with your master. He is of no significance. You know my terms. Do you accept or no?"
Little John paused for a few moments, pretending to think the matter over, but there was no doubt in his mind what his answer was going to be.
"Very well, sir. I will join your service today."
The sheriff was delighted. As Little John was led away by one of the attendants, he turned to Guy of Gisborne with a chuckle.
"There's a fine recruit to my service. With an archer like him in my ranks, that pestilent Robin Hood must begin to fear for his life."
"Perhaps," said Guy, "but I did not altogether like the look of the fellow. There was too much independence in his manner. You may have taken on more than you bargained for."
"Oh, nonsense, nonsense," the sheriff laughed. "I'll soon bring him to heel. It's the power of money. You notice how quickly he accepted my offer when I promised him 30 marks. That's what buys loyalty, my doubting friend. Money."
"You may be right," said Guy of Gisborne. "We shall see." If they could have read Little John's thoughts at that moment, they would have had no further doubts.
"Well," he was thinking, "that's the first part of the plan. Now to show the sheriff that he's bought himself the most troublesome servant there ever was in England."
In the days that followed, Little John, Ronald Greenleaf as he now was, went to great trouble to show just how useless and troublesome a servant he could be. He lay in bed till midday. He treated the other servants and attendants of the sheriff like dogs. He demanded food and drink in great quantities at the most inconvenient times, then complained bitterly about its quality. He banged roughly about the castle, knocking plates and pots flying from the tables, pushing people rudely out of the way, swearing and complaining. He avoided all work, and even to the sheriff himself behaved in a surly, unhelpful fashion. After 2 days of this, the sheriff said he planned to go hunting in Sherwood Forest the next day.
"Is that not where the famous outlaw lives?" asked Little John.
"Aye, it is," said the sheriff.
"Will you be hunting him?"
"Not tomorrow, Greenleaf. Tomorrow we hunt for the pot, if that damned Robin Hood has left any game alive in the forest. But one day soon he will be the quarry, have no fear, and when that day comes, I will hunt him to his death."
"You must take me with you when that day comes."
"I will indeed. But meanwhile, tomorrow we hunt the deer. I want you to come with us. I want to see if your aim is as true at a moving target as it is at a fixed one. So we rise early in the morning."
"Very well, sir," said Little John.
But he was careful to stay up very late that night, drinking and singing and making great noise. And the next morning it was impossible to get him to stir from his bed. So the sheriff went off to the forest, and Little John snored the morning through. Shortly after noon, he rose and called for breakfast.
"Why am I never given any food in this place?" he roared at the steward. "Do you know what the time is? I've fasted all day. How can I fight for the Lord Sheriff if you starve me, man? Come, me breakfast immediately, and something substantial and sustaining."
But the steward was already tired of the new man and his ways.
"You have not eaten, Greenleaf," he said, "because you've only this minute got up. The rest of the household were up before 7 this morning and breakfasted and away to the forest by 8. You'll get nothing till they return. You can join them for dinner, if the sheriff is not too angry with you."
"You impertinent dog," roared Little John. "I shall be starved to death by that time. Do you want me to die?"
"This house would be the quieter for it,"
returned the steward, planting himself before the buttery door. But Little John, who was vastly enjoying playing the role of the outrageous servant, pushed him easily to one side and marched into the buttery and made them bring him bread and beef and ale. News of his behaviour soon reached the cook. Now he was a big man and a bold one, and rather short-tempered. He did not like the sheriff, his master. He'd sometimes thought it would be a blessing for the people of Nottingham if he should poison both the sheriff and Guy of Gisborne, and he liked him even less now he'd recruited this great troublesome lout. He buckled on his belt, marched straight to the buttery, and with one sweep of his sword cleared all Little John's breakfast from the table. "Get out of here, you rogue," the cook shouted. "You will eat at the proper hour or not at all." Little John stared at him in amazement.
"Here's another impudent pup, disturbing my honest peace. Do you not know, fellow, that a hard-working man like me requires a quiet start to his day?"
"It may be the start of your day, but it's the middle of mine, and no one here is to be disturbed by your demands for breakfast."
Little John was both amused and impressed by the cook's courage.
"I have a mind to teach you a severe lesson, little cook, but I fear your swordsmanship may be no better than your cooking."
"You will test it at your peril."
"Test it I will, then."
And with that, Little John stood up from the table, unsheathed his sword, and the fight began. It was a good fight and a long one, and one of the noisiest there's ever been. Both men believed in roaring a good deal as they fought, taunting their opponent with insults. They fought their way across the buttery, scattering dishes and plates about, and then into the main hall where tables and chairs went flying before them. The damage to the castle was greater than any damage to either of the swordsmen. In fact, for all their clamour and roaring, neither of them succeeded in so much as scratching the other. In the end, the fight petered out from sheer exhaustion. Little John stood back a pace, lowered his sword, and grinned at the cook.
"I would gladly trounce you for another hour," he said, "but I'm too faint from hunger. It is not fair to starve a man and then fight him when he's as weak as a baby."
"Aye, it is hungry work, this fighting," said the cook. "Let us return to the buttery and see if there's any beef and ale left."
So they did, and sat down and ate and drank together.
"I found out one thing," said Little John, "that you are a better swordsman than a cook. Why do you not give up this kitchen life of yours and find some real adventure?"
I would not wish to fight the sheriff's cause for him.
"Nor I," said Little John. "But I could find you a nobler man to follow."
Who would that be?
"The sheriff's enemy, Robin Hood."
What, the outlaw of Sherwood?
"The very same."
You know him?
"I serve him," said Little John, "and today I mean to leave this castle and return to the forest."
Well, I've heard much of your Robin Hood, and sometimes I've wished I were of his company.
"Then come with me today."
The cook paused in thought. Then he reached across and grasped Little John's hand.
"I will come with you, but we will not go empty-handed. I know where we can find him a few little presents from the Sheriff of Nottingham."
The cook knew where all the sheriff's silver was kept. They spread out a blanket on the floor, filled it with valuable plate and goblets and spoons, and a pile of gold and silver coins, and then made their way to Robin Hood's lair in the forest.
"Where have you been these past few days?" cried Robin. "We've been hearing strange tales from Nottingham."
"Not so strange as the truth," said Little John, "for I have made myself a friend of the Sheriff of Nottingham. I told him he should make peace with the outlaws of Sherwood. Oh, it was not easy, but I persuaded him, and persuaded him to send you some small tokens of his goodwill."
Little John threw open the blanket. Robin gazed in astonishment. Then he broke into a slow smile. "The sheriff is generous. But did he send these gifts, I wonder, or did you steal them? Is it Little John, the great peacemaker I see, or Little John, the great liar? And who is your companion? Come, this time let us have the real truth." So Little John told the whole story, and for a while the woods echoed with laughter. And when he finished, he added,
"But there's more fun yet to be had, for I know where the sheriff is hunting today. And I believe, if you will excuse my presence for a further hour or two, I might be able to bring a most distinguished guest to your dinner table tonight."
"We'll prepare a worthy feast for him," said Robin, "and his own cook shall cook it, and it'll be served on his own silver plate. But take care, Little John.
He's a cruel and unforgiving man, and if he finds you out, your life will be the price.
Little John went alone to the path he knew the sheriff would take on his return to the castle. He rested until he heard the sheriff and his men approaching.
God save thee, master,
he cried, kneeling before the sheriff.
Ronald Greenleaf, what are you doing here? I was told you were still in bed, too sick or too lazy to come hunting.
Oh, I did oversleep a little, sir, and I'm sorry for it. But I can make amends now, for I've been wandering the forest here alone, and have come across a most rare and marvellous sight.
Oh? What is that?
A great herd of deer, 70 or more, led by the strongest and fairest hart I ever saw. And they were all, every one of them, green in colour.
Green? Cried the sheriff. I never heard of such creatures. Where were they? Why did you not shoot one of them and bring it to show me?
Oh, I did not dare, my lord. They're big animals, and their antlers look dangerously sharp. I was afraid that if I killed one, the others would kill me.
How far away is this marvellous herd?
Some 2 miles from here.
Could you lead me there?
Oh, I believe so, sir, but you must leave your horse behind, for the track is too narrow and overgrown. Indeed, you should not bring any of your men, as we'll have to be most careful and quiet, or we'll never see him.
The sheriff hesitated. He rarely went anywhere without his attendant guard, but now curiosity overcame his caution. He sent his men on to the castle and followed Little John into the depths of the forest. The path was twisting and complicated. In places they had to fight their way through clinging fronds of bramble and wild rose. The sheriff's fine clothes were torn, and he was panting hard to keep up, with no idea what direction they were taking, but with a mounting suspicion that it was a good deal more than 2 miles, when suddenly they emerged into a spacious clearing. Little John stopped, and the sheriff looked up to see they were surrounded by men in Lincoln green.
"This is the herd I spoke of," said Little John, "and this is the great hart who is their leader."
The sheriff knew he was face to face with the man he had hunted for so long.
"The devil take you, Greenleaf," he cried. "You have betrayed me to my greatest enemy."
But Robin bowed to the sheriff and said, "Welcome to my home, sir. You will come to no harm while you are my guest. I've long wanted to meet you, and now I take the chance to be your host at dinner." A great feast had been prepared for them, of hare and grouse and pheasant and venison, all richly roasted on a spit, and red and white wine, and fruit and cheese. The sheriff was hungry from his day's sport, but his appetite died within him when he saw his own cook serving the food onto his own finest tableware.
"You have served me falsely," he snarled at Little John, "and I will be revenged on you."
"You speak boldly for a man alone among his enemies," said Robin. "But you have my promise that no harm will come to you here. All you are required to do is to eat and drink and enjoy our company. I would I could be sure of a similar welcome if ever I came into your castle. Perhaps you will like our life so well you'll wish to stay with us and become an outlaw yourself." But the sheriff was not amused. He ate little and remained sour and bitter. When the feast was over, the outlaws made him change his clothes for a suit of Lincoln green. "What will the king say," said Robin, "when he hears that his sheriff of Nottingham has gone over to the outlaws of Sherwood, together with his cook? But now I bid you good night, and happy dreams under the stars." Soon all was quiet in the dark glade. The embers of the fire burnt themselves out. It was a still night, but the sheriff could not sleep. Over and over again his mind went through the humiliations of the day. "They shall pay for this," he thought. "Every man of them will pay with his life if I get safely back to my castle. And those two, Little John and Robin Hood, will die slowly. I will devise such tortures for them both." But while these thoughts surged through his mind, his body was being tortured by the hard ground beneath him. He was used to sleeping in a soft bed, between silken sheets. The floor of the forest was painfully unaccommodating. He found it least painful when he lay on his back, but he could not sleep like that, and when he turned on his side, his hip bones seemed to grind into solid rock, and he could find no way to settle his arm and shoulder comfortably. He thought of trying to escape, but knew it was impossible. Robin had posted guards round the camp, and even if he could manage to creep past them undetected, he'd no idea which direction to take through the forest. He shifted again, and reconciled himself as best he could to the prospect of a wakeful night. It must have been almost dawn when he finally dropped off to sleep, for it seemed only a moment later that he was wakened by a cheerful call from Robin.
Good morning, my Lord Sheriff. I trust you slept well. You'll soon come to love our life under the greenwood tree.
The sheriff ached in every muscle and joint of his body.
Oh, I can imagine no harder life than this. I would not accept this life for all the gold in England. Ah, you've slept too long in a bed under a roof, said Robin. But have no fear. You'll quickly learn our ways. I swear that within 12 months you'll wonder how you could ever tolerate the soft life of the castle. I would rather die than face the prospect of 12 whole months of this.
But I have promised you your life is safe with us.
Then let me go today, and I promise you that I shall no longer seek to destroy you and your band.
Then you must swear me a solemn oath, said Robin, by the grace of Our Lady, the Mother of Christ, that you will contrive no harm to me or to my men, by land or by water, by day or by night, from this day forth, and that if ever you find any of my men in need, then you will help them to your utmost. Friar Tuck was brought to administer the oath. The sheriff laid his hand upon the sword and swore with full solemnity. Robin then shook his hand and gave him back his clothes and had him taken to the Nottingham Road and set free. But as he walked slowly towards the city, the sheriff was already planning his revenge. For a long time, the outlaws of Sherwood Forest were left undisturbed. The sheriff sent no expeditions against them that summer, or in the autumn. And so the year turned once more, and soon it was May again, and still there'd been no attempt to root them out of their greenwood home. Robin began to wonder if the sheriff really meant to honour his oath.
Oh, do not think it, said Friar Tuck. The man is a rogue and a trickster, as cruel and cunning and black-hearted as a carrion crow. He's biding his time, that's all, hoping you'll relax your guard, and then he'll strike and strike to kill.
What do you think, Little John? Asked Robin.
I do not know. I don't like the man, and I don't trust him. He's as tyrannical to the poor people round here as ever he was, and as cruel. Yet he seems to be keeping his promise. He's made no attacks on us. I don't know what to think.
Robin was of the same uncertain mind, but more impatient. When he was sworn to destroy us, then we knew where we were and what we were dealing with, and we knew how to deal with it. But now it's all unsure. I think I liked it better before. I wish there was some way of putting the matter to the test and settling it once and for all. The chance came sooner than they expected. In early June, news reached them of a great archery contest that was being planned by the sheriff. It would be held in Nottingham, and its avowed aim was to find the man who could be hailed as the finest archer in England. The prize was to be an arrow with a silver shaft and a head and feathers of rich red gold.
It's a trap, Robin, said Friar Tuck. The crafty devil knows that you will not be able to resist the chance of showing you are the finest archer in England. You would be a fool to go.
And what does Little John say?
It may be a trap, but it might be clever to walk into it, prepared. If you're so anxious to settle the matter, then you should take up the challenge and be prepared for a trap. If nothing happens, then you'll know the sheriff feels bound by his oath. If it does, then we'll give 'em a fight they will not forget quickly, and at least the question will be resolved one way or another.
Robin agreed. So they considered deeply and laid their plans,
and then Robin called his whole band of men together, nearly 150 men in Lincoln Green. "I have decided," he told them, "to enter the archery contest at Nottingham tomorrow." There was a great cheer at this. "But since we cannot be certain that the sheriff has forsaken his plan to destroy us, and it may be that this contest is bait to lure us into a trap, we must be ready. 3 others will enter the contest with me, and we 4 must stay close together at all times. A further 45 men will mingle with the crowds and keep a close lookout, and be ready to come to our aid at a moment's notice. The rest of you will take up positions in the forest to help us if we have to fight our way home. Those of us who are going into Nottingham will change our Lincoln Green for more customary clothing. We do not wish to provoke the sheriff. None of you must do anything to start a disturbance. Be alert and stay close at hand and be ready for trouble, but I do not want it said that we started it. I trust that tomorrow may bring nothing more exciting than the archery contest. But if it does, then we must give a good account of ourselves and pray that Our Lady will protect us from harm." The city of Nottingham had never seen so many people. Archers from all over England, more than 100 of them, were there, and hundreds more folk from the countryside around flocked in to enjoy the great occasion. 2 hours before the contest, it was almost impossible to get close to the great field. Robin and Little John, and the 2 others who'd been chosen to compete, struggled through.
"No sign of trouble here," said Little John. "Just a normal holiday crowd, multiplied by 10.
"If there was to be fighting, a lot of innocent people would be hurt," replied Robin.
You see the flags and banners over there by the targets? That's where the sheriff and his friends and attendants will be sitting. That's where the trouble will start, if it starts at all. He'll make no move until the contest itself is over."
This proved so. The contest proceeded smoothly. When Little John and the 2 others were eliminated, Robin told Little John to stay close by him and sent the others to order all his men to get as near to the sheriff's enclosure as they could and to squirm their way to the front of the crowd. Robin was shooting with his usual calm mastery, each arrow finding the gold. There were 3 contestants in the final round: Robin himself, a knight from Warwickshire, and a yeoman from Cumbria. The sheriff walked out to the target and placed a thin wand of willow vertically against the middle of the target. This time, each man was to shoot 3 arrows. The yeoman stepped forward first. Each of his arrows found the gold, but none of them touched the wand. Then the knight. His first 2 arrows found the gold, and the third split the wand. There was a roar of cheering which died away to silence as the sheriff put another wand on the target, and Robin walked to his mark. His first arrow found the gold, but not the willow. But his second hit the middle of the gold and split the wand. No one moved as the third arrow soared high into the air, hovered, then dropped. So true that it split the second arrow clean down the middle. Little John was at Robin's shoulder as he walked between the cheering lines of spectators towards the enclosure.
"You've passed the first test," he whispered. "The second may be more difficult."
"I will approach the sheriff alone," Robin said. "Keep about 20 yards away on the edge of the crowd and take command of the men." He could see the sheriff clearly now, splendidly dressed, with Guy of Gisborne at his side, as ever, and his bodyguard close behind him. The sheriff was not smiling. Robin went up and knelt before him. "That was the finest display of archery I have ever seen, or ever hope to see," the sheriff said. "Tell me, what is your name?" "I think you know my name well enough. It is scarcely a year, sir, since you dined at my table, in Sherwood Forest." "I remember it," said the sheriff. "I trust you also remember the oath you swore there." "I expected you here today." Now the sheriff was beginning to smile.
and I have prepared a welcome for you. It is my turn now to act as host."
He turned to Guy of Gisborne, who raised his hand, and 50 of the sheriff's men stepped forward, their swords drawn. There was a gasp from the crowd. Everyone looked at Robin. "You remember your oath, but you do not honor it," he said. "But I warn you, my men are here in force, and if you try to take me now, there will be much bloodshed in your city. The blood will be on your head." There was a moment's pause. "Take him now!" Guy of Gisborne snarled. The sheriff's eyes narrowed in rage and hatred. "Seize the dog!" he cried, leaping forward to grab Robin by the throat. But Robin was too nimble, and as he jumped backwards, a flight of arrows sang through the air, and many found their mark. Several of the sheriff's men went down, wounded. Guy of Gisborne fell forwards with an arrow through his black heart. For several minutes all was shouting and confusion. Robin's sword was in his hand, and he cut one man down who was barring his path back to Little John and his outlaws. It was a running battle now. Following their plan, the outlaws retreated across the common, taking turns to stand and hold off the enemy with swords and staffs, while the others fell back. Friar Tuck's quarterstaff was swirling and twirling and cracking skulls with a vengeance. The crowds disappeared as if by magic, but more and more of the sheriff's men closed in from all sides, firing volleys of arrows, then coming in with swords. 3 of Robin's men went down. Little John took an arrow through his knee.
"Oh, Robin, you must leave me. I cannot walk. Don't let me fall into the sheriff's hands. Kill me and make your escape before it's too late."
"I cannot do that," said Robin. "I know the way," cried Will Scarlet, and bending down he took the wounded giant on his back and carried him along while Robin held off the attackers. So they came to the edge of the green and the start of the narrow streets leading out of the city. They were safer here with the houses close about them, and Robin called a halt. While his men regrouped themselves and attended to their wounded companions, he looked back across the green. 300 yards away he could see the sheriff, issuing orders to his men, waving his arms about, clearly ordering them to circle round and try to cut off their retreat. "We must be quick," called Robin. "But first, let me show them what the champion archer of England can do." He took his longbow and carefully fitted an arrow. He sighted and steadied himself for the most important shot of his life. Then he loosed the arrow. It seemed an age before it plunged, but there was no mistaking the aim. It found the heart of the Sheriff of Nottingham and struck him dead on the instant. That one shot marked the end of the battle. Without their leader and without Guy of Gisborne, the sheriff's men faded away. And it marked, too, the end of Robin's long fight with the authorities. The next Sheriff of Nottingham was a cautious man and not so cruel as his predecessor. He did not persecute the people, and he made no move to drive the outlaws from Sherwood Forest. From that day on, for many years, Robin and his men were able to hunt the game of the forest in peace and enjoy the hard and merry life under the greenwood tree.